My name is Judy Jenner, and today I'd like to give you a brief speech which has been recorded for SpeechPool to help my colleagues practice interpreting about an exam here in the United States called the FCICE, the Federal Court Interpreting Certification Examination. I know that's a mouthful. It will be relatively fast, but there really won't be any facts or figures that you have to write down. Now the actual speech will start in 3 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, you might be thinking about becoming a court interpreter either here or in the US or in Europe, and I wanted to tell you a little bit today about an exam that we have here in the United States, which is widely considered the holy grail of court interpreter certification. As you may know, the US is a very large state, and we have 50 states here, and the vast majority of them have some sort of state-level certification for court interpreters. Not for all languages, it depends on the state, and it gets pretty complicated, but I won't focus on that today. So in addition to these state certifications, there is one certification at the federal level that is the one that I'm going to be speaking about, which is the FCICE, the Federal Court Interpreter Certification Examination. It's been around since the 80s, I believe, and it's currently only offered in Spanish. It used to be offered, I believe, also in Haitian Creole and in French, but hasn't been administered for a long time. Now, this exam was originally developed at the University of Arizona at the National Center for Interpretation, Agnes Horry, and this was years and years ago, and it was always administered also by the University of Arizona, but it's run by the federal government because those are the people who are in charge of administering it and grading it. But it was originally developed at U of A at the University of Arizona, which is a leading university here in the American Southwest. And then some time ago, U of A lost the contract to actually give the exam, and it went to the National Center for State Courts, which is interesting that a state court agency has a federal exam, but I digress. So when U of A had the contract to give the exam, remember that it was originally developed by them, it was held in front of a live jury. So the oral portion of this interpreting exam was in front of a panel of judges who would grade your evaluation live, which is very similar to what's done these days at the United Nations and the European Union. But for cost reasons, it's not how it's done anymore. It's now just simply recorded, and the rendition of the candidate is sent to Washington, D.C. to be graded, again, by a panel of experts, which of course includes fellow federally certified court interpreters. Now, the exam itself is divided into 2 portions, the written portion and the oral portion. The written portion is offered every 2 years. Next time it's going to be offered is 2016, so next year. And it's administered around the country at testing centers. So the federal government contracts with companies that have these basically labs where you go into a computer and take this exam. It's pretty formal. You can't bring any water in, you can't bring any cell phones or anything like that. They only let you bring in your car key because, here in the western part of the U.S. we don't have great public transportation mostly, so you do need your car key if you want to be able to get there and leave. It's all multiple choice, so it's not too terribly difficult, but it's probably at the level of an exam that you would take to get into graduate school here in the U.S., which are called GMAT, for example, or GRE, but just the verbal portion. So it has some reading comprehension, some synonyms, some antonyms, different things that have to do with interpreting and choosing the best translation, identifying errors, things like that. Now you can prepare for it pretty well if you purchase a booklet that's published by the FCIC that gives you actual examples of how this exam works and gives you insight into how it's graded. And that exam is in both English and Spanish, which is how it differs from the exams at the state level. The written portion is usually only in English, with some exceptions. So I took that exam in 2013, passed it relatively easily. I think there are 6 or 8 sections on it, and you have to pass just overall. and I think the minimum passing score is a 70, but I'll have to double check into that. And then the oral portion is where it gets really difficult. As the name implies, this is an interpreting exam, so it really comes down to whether you can actually interpret at the level that's required for the federal courts. And it's quite difficult. I took it once in 2013 as well, and I didn't pass it. So I took it again in 2015, and I did pass it, which is very exciting. So the oral exam, and of course I won't tell you anything about what's actually on the exam. I will tell you what to expect in general terms, and all the information I'm providing is also available from the FCICE in their practice booklet. So there's basically 4 portions. There's one sight translation from English into Spanish, one sight translation the other direction, and there's a consecutive portion, and there's a fast simultaneous portion, and the relatively slow simultaneous portion. So sorry, that's actually 5 if you've been keeping track. And since you're interpreting this, I'm sure you have been keeping track. So the most feared portion of this exam is usually the simultaneous portion, the fast portion, which is spoken at about 160 words a minute, which is a bit faster than I'm speaking right now. And it's usually, and I can tell you this because the FCIC tells you that too, it's usually a conversation between an expert witness and either a district attorney or a public defender. So it's a two-way communication, but it all goes just into Spanish. So everybody's speaking English and you have to go into Spanish. And it does get very, very fast. And that was also the portion I was the most afraid of. And I don't know how I did on that portion individually, because the exam people, well, the administrators, sorry, they don't tell you what you got on the individual portion. They just give you an overall score, and you have to score 80% to pass this exam, which I think is very high, and not that many people pass it, but I think the exam is very, very well structured. I think it tests exactly what you need to know in the federal courts, and I really appreciate exams that really replicate real life. Because in a court, that's exactly how quickly people speak. Attorneys and judges usually don't slow down for the interpreter, so you must be able to perform at that level. But actually, something I like to say about this exam is that it's easier in many ways than real life, because you have perfect audio, you're sitting in a room by yourself with a headset, nobody's talking at the same time, so you're actually in a quiet place, which is very different than an actual courtroom. So that's a brief overview of the FCICE exam. Interpreters who have passed the exam get the designation FCICE, which stands for Federally Certified Court Interpreter, and I'm absolutely delighted to be one of them. So if you're thinking about taking the exam, I hope this has helped you a little bit, and if you've interpreted it, well, you've made it to the end. Congratulations, and thank you so much for listening.